The Great Flood. Is it just a mere fantasy of our ancestors, or is it a memory of real catastrophic events of the very distant past? Actually, every evidence points to the second option. We've got plenty of not only mythological evidence but also of geological evidence to point that the Great Flood could have really occurred in the very distant past at the end of the last ice age. Therefore, in this video I would like to talk to you about how the myths from all around the world connect with the real geological events of the very distant prehistory, and how the myths of the Great Deluge, of the Great Flood, all are just a recollection of the very distant events. My name is Alexander, I'm a Polish researcher and author of Deja Vu Has Everything Already Been, my book about lost civilizations, in which you will find many other information and sources about the Great Flood, about lost civilizations, and how all the evidence connect to the one big picture. So don't forget to check out my book, you will find links in the description. It can be almost shipped worldwide, it can be found on many Amazons. And in this episode we will talk about the Great Flood. And when we think of the Great Flood, I think the most popular story is the biblical story of Noah and his ark, onto which he takes his family, he takes the animals, and he saves them from the global cataclysm that wiped out entire Earth, that wiped out entire humanity except for Noah. However, this story is most probably not original, because in Mesopotamia we find many other stories that predate for thousands of years the biblical one, and all of them point to the same specifics as are described in the biblical narrative. And we find, for instance, depending where was it Akkadian story, was it a Sumerian story or other story found in Mesopotamia, we've got many heroes. We've got, for instance, Utnapishtim, we've got Xisuthros, we've got Atrahasis, and a few more. However, all these people are one and the same hero. They are just Mesopotamian Noahs. And when it comes to the biblical story, we've got the information that Noah took onto his ark not only animals but also his family. He took himself, of course, he took his wife, 3 sons, and 3 wives of his sons. So on the ark there was Noah and 7 other people. And the same story can be found in those Mesopotamian stories, in which there is this main hero, where was it Xisuthros, Atrahasis, or Utnapishtim, and this hero takes into his ark 7 Apkallus, so 7 other people, also called the 7 sages. So as we see in the biblical narrative and in the Mesopotamian stories, we've got the main hero and 7 other people that were taken onto the ark. The same thing can be found in ancient India. In Vishnu Purana, we've got information that the main hero, Manu, is also, just like Noah, warned that there will be a global deluge. And he is warned by God Vishnu. He, of course, just as in the case of Noah, builds a boat, and when he has his boat, he takes onto it not only himself but also 7 rishis, 7 sages. So as we see in this myth, there is also Manu, the main hero, and 7 other people. So as we see, there are many similarities between myths from all around the world that may point to the same single source of these stories. And actually, researchers found that all around the world there are about 2,000 to 4,000 flood myths, stories, and legends. And from these 2,000, we've got about 500 that are most probably independent of the missionary actions of Jesuits or other priests throughout the centuries. So we've got most probably 500 ancient original narratives about the Great Flood, and all of these 500 narratives are talking about the main hero that gets his ark, builds a boat, or just get some canoe or just some other piece of wood, and who is saved from the deluge because he goes high into the mountains, just as the ark in the Noah story. So as you see, we've got plenty of similarities in myths from all around the world, which may point that it is not just a mere fantasy of our ancestors, but it can really describe real events from our very distant past. However, it doesn't stop here, because we do not only got all of these myths and all of these similarities, but we've also got the geological evidence that directly point to the great global catastrophe, and we've got even the geological time frame of it. And when it comes to the evidence, the geological evidence, for instance, I think, in my opinion, the best evidence for the Great Flood are the intermixed species, their skeletons, which are mixed in chaotic conditions, which may be found on Alaska, in France, and in a few other places on Earth. And for instance, in France, we've got these mixed skeletons of species. We've got them mixed and deep and hidden deeply in caves, and they are accumulated in the cavities of these caves. And it is very interesting because in these skeletons we've got many species of megafauna. Megafauna were huge mammals like the mastodons, the saber-toothed tigers, and many other, of which about 70% went extinct suddenly at the end of the last ice age between about 10,500 years BC and 9,500 years BC. So as we see, we've got a time frame, and as we see, 70% of these huge mammals went extinct during this single event, because we've got plus minus these dates, because, you know, this is geology, we cannot date this to 1 year plus minus. We've got like 500 or 1,000 year gaps. And it's very interesting because many modern theories that are, let's say, accepted by the mainstream are, in my opinion, they do not explain this phenomenon correctly. Because, for instance, there is an overkill theory which states that during this time humans all over the world just eaten these animals, these huge animals, and that's how they went extinct. However, we are talking about the very distant prehistory, and during these times it is not probable that humans all around the world just killed all these species. In my opinion, it cannot be that way, and we've got many evidence that supports my side. And it's very interesting because, as we see, we've got intermixed species, mostly of megafauna. We also have, in these caves in France, we've got mixed species from northern and southern hemisphere. It is interesting because geologists say that this mix of species most probably were just, these skeletons were taken to these caves by floods, maybe by local floods, etc. However, in my opinion, if in these caves there are species from northern and southern hemisphere, it cannot be a single local flood. In my opinion, it must have been a global cataclysm, a global deluge, which just was able to take species from northern and southern hemisphere, and with these waters flowing, just take them onto these caves. The same case is in the Alaskan mug, in which we've got chaotic species, chaotic skeletons, mostly of the mammoths. So as we see, we've got geological evidence for it, and as we see, we've got even the time frame, because we've got the megafauna that went extinct at the end of the last ice age between 10,500 and 9,500 years BC. So we should just check what happened during this distant epoch. And actually, we've got plenty of evidence that during this distant epoch there really occurred a flood. Because, as the name suggests, that was the end of the last ice age, so it was end of the last glaciation. So at that time the glaciers were melting, and actually they were melting very rapidly. It wasn't just like a meltdown for thousands of years, it was a meltdown in about a few hundred years. And during just, let's say, 500 years, just assume, during these 500 years, all around the world there sank a total area of about 25 million square kilometers, which is more than the area of modern North America. So during this distant epoch there sank a huge amount of land, which may point to the global deluge, because actually during this single epoch of about, let's say, 500 years, all around the world the sea level rose about actually more than 120 meters. So as we see, 120 meters in rise of the sea levels. That is a very large number. And as we see, during this distant epoch there really were some catastrophic events, because what caused these meltdowns, in my opinion, it should have been caused by some cataclysmic event, let's say a comet strike or some other events like supernova or like the solar flare. There are many theories about which I speak in my book Deja Vu Has Everything Already Been, and in which I point to the exact sources, point to the exact myths and many other things. So as we see, to sum up, we've got plenty of similarities between flood myths. We also get the geological evidence from these caves in France and from the mud in Alaska that point to the time frame of the last ice age. We've also got information from independent geological sources that during the end of the last ice age there were sudden meltings of the glaciers, and as we saw, on the entire planet there sank an area of more than North America, and the sea level rose about 120 meters. So as we see, we've got plenty of information that the Great Flood was probably not just a myth of our ancestors, but was a memory of real catastrophic events of the very distant prehistory. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and watch other videos. In the next episode we will talk about how this information actually connects with the lost civilizations, which are, again, like the flood myths, mentioned all around the world. And what is very interesting, they all mention the same time frame that we've just discussed. So don't forget to check out my other social media, check out my book, and don't forget to stay on this channel for new episodes.